really made your name for yourself as an opponent of the Biden censorship regime. That was this really well-financed government-backed effort to control the information system, to censor dissidents to official orthodoxies around, COVID origins and its government responses to it, the war in Ukraine, Hunter Biden's laptop, and much more than that. So it's fair to say that you're not a fan of the Democratic Party or its censorious behavior. You must
Yeah.
have been very excited then, like I was, when Trump announced in January that he was going to restore free speech. He made this big executive order. He said, free speech has been restored. It's done.
Yeah.
Well, it's been about 10 months since that pronouncement. How are you feeling about this free speech restoration? Does free speech feel like it's back? Is the
No.
censorship over?
No, it's worse. It's worse than anything Biden did. I mean, and I think that was pretty evident early on. So, along with that executive order, which I was slightly optimistic for, he signed another executive order saying that basically we're going to find ways to remove people from the country if they don't like Israel. Those were not the words used, of course. It's like anti-Semitism and not, going along with our foreign policy and stuff. But I was very concerned when I saw that. And given what some members of his administration had been seeing along those lines, I was like, oh, what they're going to do is start deporting people who are critical of Israel, which then started happening in March. I think everybody, or most people who've been paying attention, remember it starting with Mahmoud Khalil. And then, it's been like a multifaceted effort. It's not just the deportations, that's one thing they're doing, but also pressuring universities, basically telling, threatening to withhold or withholding funds unless they stamp down on anti-Semitic activity, which is clearly includes criticism of Israel and pro-Palestine protests and that kind of thing. Not letting in, scouring people's social media posts before letting them into the country, which is unprecedented, threatening to revoke people's green cards or denying them adjustment of status if they've been anti-Semitic. And then, it's very clear based on what this administration has done and said in the past that they consider criticism of Israel to be anti-Semitism, or at least they pretend to consider it that. So it's really the opposite of free speech. And then we've seen it also outside the context of Israel-Palestine with putting pressure on ABC to fire Jimmy Kimmel, getting people fired for celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, or much more nefariously, just saying, I didn't really like the guy, but people shouldn't be shot. They were even getting people like that fired. So just really, this is like a very, very bald attempt to use government powers and authority to punish people for having opinions that the administration doesn't like.
Right. There has been this whole slew of censorship measures, a lot of it, as you said, organized around criticism of this foreign government. And I want to get into some of your efforts as a, principled free speech advocate to combat some of it. One of them, actually, really most recently, you filed a lawsuit as the new director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. Congratulations on
Oh,
your new
thanks.
position, by the way.
It's actually American Arab,
Oh, I'm sorry.
which does not come easily. No, I still have to remember because there's also the Arab American Institute. They try, I think the point of our name is that we're American first, Arab second.
Right. Well, you have a new lawsuit.
Yeah.
It is against Gavin Newsom and the government of California over this new hate speech law that they created last month. It's called AB 715, and it compels California public schools to adopt new hate speech codes banning one type of speech, anti-Semitism, and protecting one specific identity group, Jewish students or Jewish Zionist students. This new law, as your organization points out, does not even provide a definition for what that anti Semitism is. It just kind of relies on the Biden administration's guidelines, which uses this IHRA definition of anti Semitism, this radical speech code, which was created by foreign governments to suppress the free speech rights of Americans. Can you talk about what is really in Gavin Newsom's AB 715, and what about it does your lawsuit challenge?
So it's a little bit complicated, but I would say it's somewhat interesting. So the law does not define anti-Semitism itself, which I think is a big, big red flag and also extremely problematic. Um, it, I believe, does so. I mean, this is a key term, right? It has all these requirements for how schools are supposed to combat anti-Semitism, but never defines a key term. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen a law like that, especially when this is very contested. This key term is contested. There are people who think criticizing Israel or Zionism is anti-Semitism, and there are quite a few people like me who think it's not. So not defining a key term that is hotly contested is just a fatal flaw in a law. And there's a doctrine called void for vagueness doctrine, which is under the 14th Amendment due process clause, which says that people have a right to have laws be clearly defined so that you know what conduct or speech is prohibited. And this doctrine is even more strictly enforced when the conduct or speech, when what the law is getting at is effectively speech, which this one does. It talks about stereotypes and slurs and, I forgot exactly, but things along those lines that are clearly speech. So then courts become even more protective because, we're very concerned because this implicates the First Amendment. Um, so I would say I'm not sure I have seen a law that that does not define a key term like that. And I could say like there are some Supreme Court cases that said the I believe it was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals where we're in that's like California, Arizona, New Mexico, struck down a law that prohibited abusing or insulting a teacher on school grounds and said that was too vague. What's abusing or insulting in front of students? What does that mean? I mean, you have to define those terms. And I would say not defining anti-Semitism is a much, much graver problem when the entire law or amendments to the education code are predicated on this concept. So that's a huge problem. Another problem is it prohibits use of written materials that subject a student to unlawful discrimination. So this new bill or law amends the education code. So the pre-existing law actually had the same provision, but now that we've incorporated this new anti-Semitism without the definition, that again makes it even less clear. And before there was no provision saying that teachers could be punished for this, for subjecting a student to unlawful discrimination by adopting written materials. I mean, what does it mean to subject a student to discrimination through written materials? What if you assign The Great Gatsby or The Merchant of Venice? They have like stereotypical Jewish characters. Is that subjecting a student? You know,
Right.
so without more explanation, extremely problematic. It also requires teachers to be factually accurate in their instruction. And as our plaintiffs explain, we're representing a bunch of teachers and students in California. Well, one of our teachers, for instance, got in trouble for saying that, in many people's opinions, Israel is colonizing the West Bank. That is factual. That's the fact is that most international organizations and bodies agree with that, but she got in trouble for it as saying it was her accusers said it was anti-Semitic. So how are teachers supposed to walk both lines? So it's just a very, very fatally flawed law. And then another thing I'll mention before I shut up is so while it doesn't define it, it outsources. It says schools are to follow this Biden white paper on combating anti-Semitism. It's a 60-page document that talks about combating anti-Semitism in myriad contexts, like abroad and online. And, a lot of stuff is inapplicable to schools, I would think, or it's not clear how that would apply to schools. And it itself frequently conflates notions of criticizing Israel with anti-Semitism. It says like we need to combat efforts abroad to delegitimize Israel in fighting anti-Semitism. So clearly conflating those concepts. It itself refers to the IHRA definition, without stating that. It says it's the most prominent definition. It falls short of saying we're following it, but I think that's the implication. And as many, many people know, that also incorporates criticism of Israel. And it's the person who wrote that definition said it's not meant to carry the force of law. It's like these are things that could be indicative of anti-Semitism. If you criticize Israel and you don't criticize other countries. Of course, we know that's like a tactic that's always used. Why aren't you criticizing Nigeria or Sudan? And like, so of course, what they're trying to do, and we can see what they're trying to do, is make it so people don't really know what the law is, but they get the strong impression that if they criticize Israel or Zionism, they could be punished. So they just don't say anything, so they chill their speech or
Right.
they self-censor. Yeah.
Right. And this entire effort, as you said, to codify this IHRA definition into various laws, which has been going on across the country, but also been going on for many years now. It's all about
Yeah.
criminalizing any criticism of Israel. I mean, in that definition, it says, as an example of anti-Semitism, saying that, Israel is an apartheid state or is a racist endeavor, which is something that, Israeli government officials themselves say,
Yeah.
and they admit it. There was
Yeah.
very recently, last week, a very major victory for the First Amendment, though. Kind of a
Yeah.
brutal and devastating loss for these Israel loyalist types who
Mhm.
want to, subvert the Constitution and import this foreign speech code into American society. A federal court dismissed one of the various lawsuits that's been filed by the Zionist Jewish students who attempt to weaponize Title VI anti-discrimination laws to claim that anti-Israel discourse on campus is some kind of a threat or discrimination against their personal identity. This case was filed against MIT, and the court sided with the university over these kind of, snowflake students who demanded that the campus be turned into this completely censored safe space for their pro-genocide views. Is that a fair characterization of what happened in this case?
Yes, that's a very accurate. The only thing is, it was a court of appeal, so it wasn't just one judge district court, so it's even more significant.
Hmm.
And it upheld the lower court's dismissal.
There's a quote from the judge that you pointed out on X. It was this quote: plaintiffs are entitled to their own interpretive lens, equating anti Zionism as they define it and anti Semitism. But it's another matter altogether to insist that others must be bound by the plaintiff's view. What is this significance of this court decision on uh, more of these cases that are being brought? I mean, these organizations, Zionist organizations and pro-Israel ones, have already announced that they're seeking to bring more Title VI lawsuits against schools like Harvard and MIT on these same grounds. So, what are the implications of this decision?
So pretty big, I would say. It was one of the better decisions I've read. There have been a couple good district court decisions as well. There was one from September, I think, by Judge Young in Boston. And this was about the deportations. And he sort of recognized some very similar concepts. He sort of called it out like they're conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and they're just thinking people aren't going to figure that out. But a higher court recognizing this, of course, is important. The First Circuit is the area like Massachusetts, Maine, Rhode Island. So it only has precedential value in the First Circuit. So like the Second Circuit doesn't have to follow it. The Ninth Circuit, California, New Mexico, Arizona don't have to follow it. But it tends to carry persuasive weight. Federal courts don't like to contradict each other. Otherwise, you end up with what's called a circuit split, and then things can wind up in the Supreme Court. So it's a pretty significant opinion, and I think it really was very important that the court parsed the specific claims. I mean, one thing is, as I'm sure you know, that these groups have been doing with some success actually is just sort of painting this, first of all, lying about what's going on, and acting as though these campuses are hotbeds of anti-Semitism, which, like anybody who's been to a campus knows that's not what's going on there, a college campus. And that, most people who have been active in the pro-Palestine movement for a long time realize that a lot of Jewish student people are
I mean,
are
if it
there.
means anything, I was the president of Chabad on my campus. I never faced any anti-Semitic discrimination. Actually, the only anti-Semitism I face is from Zionists
From
who say
yeah,
that I'm like a self-hating Jew, in fact. So it
yeah.
just doesn't happen on the
I've
pro-Palestine
I've
side.
heard I've heard, and what they do, of course, is they conflate this, and they rely on statistics that also conflate this. So it's like this circular issue where they say hate, and thus the law that I challenged earlier this week is based on the same notion. The legislature says hate crimes against Jews are up 700%, blah, blah, blah. And well, if you look at the statistics they're deriving this from, which is the Anti-Defamation League statistics, they are conflating criticism of Israel and counting those as anti-Semitic incidents. So if someone marches down the street saying Israel's committing genocide, that counts as an anti-Semitic incident. So when you really parse it down, these are not hotbeds of anti-Semitism. But I think a lot of judges have had the wool pulled over their eyes. I mean, judges are on average older federal judges. That's just how it works. You have to be pretty experienced to become a federal judge. They grew up in a different time. They tend to think of Jewish people as real victims. A lot of them are like boomers or even older than that. And the Holocaust is very heavily imprinted on their mind. I think younger generations sort of grew up seeing Jews as like, for the most part, pretty well off in this country, not really discriminated against in education or the workplace or anything like that. Not in any, significant danger as a group. And So I think some of the judges are waking up and that this decision was really emblematic of that. And there was another quote I really liked that said, from the piece, something like, they're welcome to their opinion, but this is a contested issue, and we're not going to, this is to be settled through discussion and debate, not judicial fiat as to whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And I thought that was extremely astute observation to be made. And I'm like, finally, courts are getting this.
Yeah, well, it's definitely very reassuring to see that we have this judiciary to guard against these Israel loyalists who have foreign loyalties and want to subvert the Constitution with their hate speech codes.
Yeah.
One last question, not about free speech, but about Israel. Now, I've never been to Israel. I don't have any family in Israel either. That's because, like every other Jewish person in Israel, my family is not originally from there. They're from Eastern Europe. That's worth remembering too, because there's just this bizarre notion that's gone around since October 7th, thanks to people like Barry Weiss or Ben Shapiro, that Jewish people are actually indigenous to Israel. And as most people have at this point realized, it's just not true at all. And yet, I can get on a plane next week and funded by Jewish billionaires can travel to Israel. I can visit for 2 weeks. I can even make Aliyah to move there permanently. In fact, any Jewish person can do that. It's super easy, and the Israeli government encourages it. Whereas your family, unlike mine, has actually lived in Israel for centuries in the West Bank. Your grandparents, your uncles, your cousins, they all live there, but you can't visit them. How are they doing, and what is their experience like living under what Israeli human rights group B'Tselem calls this regime of Jewish supremacy in Israel?
Well, they're not doing that well. And, my father grew up in the West Bank and he left because of the occupation. Well, he said the occupation and the gossip. So he grew up in a very small village, but that was a joke. Really, the occupation is very brutal. I mean, Palestinians really, so it started in 67 and it's just been escalating in kind of oppressive tactics. I mean, it's very, very difficult to travel now from one village to the other. You can be thrown in administrative detention if you're a Palestinian forever. I have a cousin who's been in there for almost 2 years now without any charge or even being told what he did wrong. You can be held in administrative detention just on the allegation that they suspect you might do something wrong in the future. I mean, that's very like scary, dystopian, sci-fi where that's what's happening to people. So, it's really awful. I actually might be able to go there. I don't know. I went when I was 13, but it was really scary because the Israelis, like, they held us at the airport for a long time because we were like a Palestinian family. It was my dad and my brothers and I. And at checkpoints, they're very, very scary. They could just shoot you, and as everybody knows, there will be no consequences. Maybe when I went in 1997, when I was 13, maybe there would have been consequences then because things were a little bit less insane. But now there wouldn't be, and certainly not under this administration. So they could just. And so my dad doesn't go anymore either. He used to go visit his mother, but he said she died, and he said, I did it for her, but I'm not going to go subject myself to the humiliation. They strip search him at checkpoints, and he said, you have this 18-year-old with a gun in your face, and I want to go visit my mother, and I have to get like strip, and he humiliates me. They're very racist against Arabs. Like, I'm just not doing this anymore. So he no longer goes and sees his siblings. Who are there. And the great irony, is that my mom's father was a German Jew who fled Nazi Germany because of increasing anti-Semitism in the 30s. I could I could have, when I was younger, I could have gone and done birthright because of that. Well, like as a Palestinian, they make it almost completely impossible, or at least extremely challenging and scary to go. I mean, so that's like really, I think that kind of shows this like two-tiered system. Like, but based on my mom's heritage, that had nothing to do with Palestine. Like, I could go, but not my dad's. It's when he grew up there. It's just so odd.
Yeah, well, it's a real shame, these daily Israeli crimes. I think, fortunately, most of the United States, most people my age are waking up to it and they realize the truth now. Um, it was a real privilege to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining me again. I hope everybody supports the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee and also listens to your podcast, Previously Prohibited. It's very good. So again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.